Biden calls Turkey-Syria earthquakes worst in 100 years. First UN aid reaches northwest Syria as death toll tops 17,000. White helmets request international rescue teams for Syria. U.S. in touch with allies over global Chinese balloon fleet. India home demolitions, grave human rights violations, Amnesty. Rafat and Zoreen Ansari recognized for their generosity. From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana, Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. President Joe Biden said on Wednesday, Americans' thoughts and prayers go out to the people of Turkey and Syria in the wake of Monday's devastating earthquake. Biden was speaking in Madison, Wisconsin at the Laborers International Union of North America Training Center. The event is part of a cross-country tour to share the economic plan laid out in a State of the Union address this week. Biden said the death toll is rising. It's one of the worst earthquakes in that region in over 100 years, and we mourn the loss of so many lives, and we offer our deepest condolences. He also said that he called Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan immediately after the quakes, and that the U.S. offered its full support to the country. The United States Agency for International Development's specialized disaster response team arrived in Turkey on Wednesday. The teams include 159 members and 12 rescue dogs. It also carries 170,000 pounds of specialized tools and equipment, including hydraulic, concrete breaking equipment, saws, torches, and drills. In related news, hopes of finding survivors are quickly dwindling, but rescue teams are still pulling people out alive. The death toll from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria has now passed 17,000. At least 14,000 people have died in Turkey, according to the country's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. More than 3,000 have been killed in Syria. Turkey's disaster agency said in its latest bulletin over 28,000 citizens have been evacuated from the country's earthquake-affected region of Kahramanmaraş. The United Nations has confirmed that its first aid convoy since the earthquake has crossed into northwest Syria from Turkey. 6 trucks on Thursday reached Bab al-Hawa, the only border crossing authorized by the UN Security Council for aid delivery. Middle East Eye reports that highways in southern Turkey were severely damaged by the earthquake, which affected deliveries to northwest Syria. Syria's White Helmets appealed Wednesday for international help in their race against time. Mohammed Shibli, a spokesperson for the group, said international rescue teams must come into our region. He told the AFP from neighboring Turkey that people are dying every second. We are in a race against time. The organization is leading efforts to rescue people buried under rubble in rebel-held areas of earthquake-hit Syria. The White Helmets is a group of volunteer first responders formed a decade ago to save the lives of civilians during Syria's civil war. They are officially known as the Syria Civil Defense. Britain announced Wednesday that it would release an additional $968,000 to aid the White Helmets. U.S. podcast host Joe Rogan is facing criticism for defending Congresswoman Ilhan Omar for a remark she made years ago that was deemed anti-Semitic. In 2019, Omar, criticizing the influence of money from lobbies in government and the American Israeli Political Action Committee in specific, said it's all about the Benjamins. She later apologized, saying she did not know that using this phrase was an anti-Semitic trope. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy recently launched a successful crusade to expel Omar from the House Foreign Relations Committee based on that remark. But Rogan insisted on his show last Saturday that the idea that Jewish people are not into money is ridiculous. That's like saying that Italians aren't into pizza. Rogan leads Spotify's most popular podcast. Responding to him, Jewish journalist Howard Lovey tweeted, "The thing is, Joe Rogan, Italians were never slaughtered because of the pizza stereotype." Mehdi Hassan of NBC, a Muslim, tweeted that to say that Jews as a whole, as a people, are into money is one of the oldest and hardiest anti-Semitic smears of all. U.S. in touch with allies over global Chinese balloon fleet. Story comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. The U.S. Pentagon says that China has operated a global fleet of espionage balloons similar to the one shot down last week after crossing the United States. Department of Defense Brigadier General Patrick Ryder told reporters that the Chinese surveillance balloon program has been operating for several years. The U.S. on Wednesday said it has been in touch with allies over a global fleet of Chinese espionage balloons, similar to the one shot down last week by the U.S. Air Force. China insists that the balloon was merely conducting weather research, but the Pentagon described it as a high-tech spying operation. The balloon floated at an altitude far higher than most airplanes and crossed directly over at least one sensitive U.S. military site. Labor advocates on Tuesday decried a business-backed bill introduced by Republican Senate lawmakers in Iowa that would roll back child labor laws. The proposed law will allow teens as young as 14 to work in previously prohibited jobs, including mining, logging, and animal slaughtering. Senate File 167, introduced by State Senator Jason Schultz, would expand job options available to teens. The proposed bill, which comes amid an ongoing labor shortage in Iowa, also expands the hours teens may work. It also shields businesses from liability if a minor employee is sickened, injured, or killed as a result of a company's negligence. Speaking to the Des Moines Register, Charlie Wishman, president of the Iowa Federation of Labor, called the proposed law just crazy and said it will hurt children. Members of the Islamic Center of Deer Park, New York, are mourning the death of NYPD officer Adeed Fayaz on Tuesday. The 26-year-old Muslim officer died of injuries sustained on Saturday during a shooting in Brooklyn. The mosque's Imam Abdul Razak Aziz told New York's News 12 that the father of two was new to the area, but the community is still hurting. The mosque had been holding special prayers for the officer since he was shot. The suspected shooter, 38-year-old Randy Jones, is in NYPD custody. Jones has been charged with murder and attempted robbery. A white supermajority of the Mississippi House voted to create a separate court system and an expanded police force for white majority areas within the city of Jackson, Mississippi. The city, which is Mississippi's capital, is 80% black and home to a higher percentage of African American residents than any major American city. If House Bill 1020 becomes law, the white Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court would appoint 2 judges to oversee a new district within the city. That district will include all of the city's majority white neighborhoods. Mississippi's white state attorney general would appoint 4 prosecutors, a court clerk, and 4 public defenders for the new district. The state public safety commissioner, who is also white, would oversee an expanded Capitol Police force run currently by a white police chief. Azerbaijani media reports that Armenian armed forces, along with the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are preparing for an attack. It says that the sabotage group plans to organize 2 consecutive attacks in the direction of Azerbaijan's Lachin and Gubadli districts. The first attack on one of the posts of the Azerbaijani army will be carried out by a group of servicemen in the uniform of the Armed Forces of Armenia. The second will be disguised as Azerbaijani soldiers attacking the so-called Armenian military post. The tension comes in the wake of an attack on the Azerbaijani mission in Tehran on January 27th, which the country's President Ilham Aliyev denounced as a terrorist act. Azerbaijan has accused Iran of allowing a gunman to storm the mission. The country evacuated its staff and their family members from the mission after the attack and has also advised its citizens against traveling to Iran. On Tuesday, Amnesty International called on the Indian government to immediately stop the demolition of homes in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the country's only Muslim-majority region. The Human Rights Watchdog reports that houses in the districts of Srinagar, Budgam, Anantnag, and Baramulla were razed and demolished on February 4th and 5th, allegedly without notice. Local media reports also claim that homeowners who had documents of proof were not allowed to make their claims before their homes were destroyed. Amnesty believes the demolitions, which began on Saturday, are an extension of other brutal human rights violations in the region. In 2019, the Indian government stripped Jammu and Kashmir of its long-standing special status that granted it autonomy. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim this week urged young Muslims in the country not to be influenced by the way some individuals or parties interpret Islam. He spoke during a special lecture at University Selangor, a private university in Selangor, Malaysia. Anwar reminded attendees that Islam always places the values of peace, justice, and humanity above any racial and partisan sentiment. The Straits Times says that Ibrahim has called for revision of Islamic religious studies to emphasize universal values and humanity. Muslim couple Rafat and Zoreen Ansari have been lauded for contributing at least $30 million to charity so far. The national philanthropy world learned about them in 2017 when they gave $15 million to the University of Notre Dame. The gift was to launch the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. That is a scholarly center devoted to nurturing better understanding of the world's religions and the roles they play in world events. But to those in South Bend, Indiana, the Ansaris have been well known as committed and reliable philanthropic leaders for 4 decades. They began first by supporting nonprofits that help people with autism and other disabilities, which they still do. That includes Ronald McDonald House Charities of Indiana, Michiana, Memorial Hospital, local hospice organizations, and other nonprofits that benefit people in the greater South Bend area. Matt Harrington is CEO of Logan Community Resources, a South Bend nonprofit that serves children and adults with physical and intellectual disabilities. He says the 2 words that come to mind are influencer and champion. They're well respected in our community, and they've touched lives in so many ways. People know that the causes they're associated with are worthwhile. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. To discuss the United States-China policy after the Chinese balloon was shot down, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. Let's dive into our segment. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam wa rasulullah. Many of you may have seen the news in recent days about the Chinese balloon that floated across U.S. territory before being shot down by the Pentagon just off the coast of South Carolina. Obviously created quite a bit of stir in the media, a bit of an international diplomatic incident. What's the significance of this? What does it mean for U.S.-China relations? What should we think about this? To discuss this and other issues, I'm happy to bring on our special guest, Mr. Chaz Freeman. Mr. Freeman is a former U.S. diplomat and a businessman. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs from back in 1993 to 1994. Mr. Freeman was also the principal U.S. interpreter during President Nixon's landmark trip to China back in 1972. He is currently a visiting scholar at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University, and we're very happy to have him back with us today. Mr. Freeman, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and I hope you're well too.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Just getting over a bit of a cold, but aside from that, I'm doing well, thank God. So, Mr. Freeman, first, the China balloon incident. Just what's your reaction to this diplomatic incident that we saw over the past week or so? How do you think the administration handled it? What do you think was really going on here? Just your general perspective on this incident.
Well, the United States and China have come to a moment of mutual hostility that is in some respects reminiscent of the Cold War. And in fact, during the Cold War, the United States flew over 500 balloons over China and the Soviet Union. And when challenged, said they were just weather balloons, but they weren't weather balloons at all. I think in this case, this probably was a weather balloon, but it also obviously had other equipment aboard, which could detect radio signals and the like, and perform other functions. It isn't, our military was actually very sober-minded about it. They didn't see it as much of a threat. To the extent it was a threat, they took measures to reduce that threat. It was our political class that was absolutely hysterical, not a single stiff upper lip in evidence. And unfortunately, the consequence of that hysteria was the cancellation of Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Beijing. He had 3 things he was trying to do. One was to show that as President Biden and President Xi Jinping had agreed in their meeting in Bali, we could talk to each other, notwithstanding the fact that we have serious differences. The second was to try to develop some understandings to manage the relationship so it wouldn't tip into war. And the third was, I'm sorry to say, probably to posture in front of the American people to show that the Biden administration was just as tough as the Trump administration on China. In the event, the cancellation of the visit showed the world that, contrary to what they hoped, we cannot talk to each other. It also showed us that we can't manage the relationship. If we can't handle a crisis over something as relatively innocuous as a balloon, what are we going to do if there's a shooting incident between our ships or our aircraft or worse yet, a war over Taiwan. And finally, I think this showed the administration was politically so weak that it could not stand up to political pressure from the mostly Republicans, but many Democrats as well, who were posturing on the issue for political effect.
So, Mr. Freeman, what do you think the long-term result of this incident will be? Do you think it'll just fade away and Mr. Blinken will make that visit to China? Or do you think this has some long-term repercussions for the United States and how it deals with China because of politics or policy-wise? What do you think is the long-term result of this?
Well, I hope Mr. Blinken does go back to China as he had originally planned. He says he intends to do that when circumstances permit. But the problem is that the circumstances that canceled this trip were American domestic politics. And I don't know how you think about this, but I don't see any particular reason to believe that anything's going to improve terribly much on that level in the near future. So this could have long-term effects in the sense that, as I said, we've shown we can't manage crises with China. We've shown we can't keep the relationship from getting even worse and tilting towards war. And Mr. Biden is basically been cornered on the issue.
What do you think about the Chinese side of this, Mr. Freeman? I mean, assuming that the Pentagon is saying 100%, there was some spying involved with this object that at least had the capability to do that. What do you think is going through their mind? I mean, really, a weather balloon that went astray, just kind of a typical spying mission that countries do to each other all the time, that went too far. What do you think was happening on their end of this equation?
Well, it's hard to know. At the moment, the Chinese press is ridiculing the United States for our panicky reaction to something that they didn't think was that big a deal. Of course, we know that Chinese balloons have previously now flown over the United States, 3 of them in the Trump administration. They weren't detected. So Chinese, I don't think, had any reason to believe this would be detected. It was apparently caught up in the polar vortex when the jet stream shifted suddenly to the south and propelled the balloon to Idaho and Montana, where it lingered for a while. I hope that the Chinese are reviewing their internal procedures, their equivalent of the interagency process, to ensure that the next time some agency like the Weather Bureau does something that could embarrass them, that information is relayed to the top and somebody does something about it. Chinese should, if this happens again, despite whatever bad relationship we have, pick up the phone and tell us, one of our balloons gone off track and it's going to fly over you, and let's work together to figure out how to deal with this. But they didn't do that. And I suspect they didn't do it because it was completely unknown to the top leadership. I mean, how many times when NOAA releases a weather balloon, do they inform the president? I think we've made far too much of Chinese intentionality. I believe they were just as surprised as we were when the balloon got propelled by 275-mile-an-hour winds to the south.
Mr. Freeman, what are the major flashpoints right now of the U.S.-China relationship? When President Trump was in office, there was a lot of discussion about the economy and fighting over those issues, economic issues. It seems now you've got obviously the Uyghur issue, you've got Taiwan. What are the major things that these two large, powerful countries are going to have to deal with or face off over in the coming years?
Well, we've launched economic warfare against China in an effort to retard or perhaps even reverse its rise as a great economic power. Part of that is a war on technology. In the process, as happened before, we are profiling, surveilling, and basically going after Chinese American scientists and engineers, and a fair number of them are leaving us to our loss. It's China's gain, perhaps. Some of them are going to Europe. But I think the main issues between us are the same as always. And that is that in 1950, for good reasons, we intervened to suspend the Chinese Civil War. We intervened in the Taiwan Strait, and we separated part of China, Taiwan, from the rest of it. And we continue to do that. Now we're contesting China's territorial integrity, and China is a nuclear power, and it is heavying up its nuclear forces. And I really think we need to have some kind of domestic discussion about whether we really want to get into a nuclear exchange over whether an island off China, which was Chinese, should remain Chinese.
Well, very tense stuff, very dangerous stuff. In terms of the internal situation within China's government, Xi Jinping, it would appear, based on reporting, that he is going to be in office for some time, and could be a very prominent world leader for years to come. What can you tell us about him and his personality, his intentions, for those who are not very familiar with him?
He's a very self-controlled person. He'd be a terrific poker player, I believe. He spent his youth having been rusticated, sent down to the countryside to learn from peasants how ordinary people live. He seems to have come out of that experience and the persecution of his father in the great proletarian cultural revolution by becoming a bit of a control freak. And he certainly, within China, he has tightened central control of lots of things. China is, after all, it's a country of 1.4 billion people. It is very fragmented in many ways, but he's managed to exercise control in lots of ways. One of those is cutting off information from the outside world with tightened great firewall of China, as it's called. I think he's going to be in power for quite a while. He has shown, I would remind listeners that he did show an ability to learn from mistakes. When the zero COVID policy began to really damage the economy, slow growth to about 3%. Of course, we had negative growth, but 3% was bad for China. And when popular protests began on a significant level against the policy, he had the courage to change course and end it, and in effect admit that he'd made a mistake. So this is somebody who's really quite a strong leader, inclined to take charge of lots of things, probably more than he should. And I guess I just stand by saying that there's an impression in the United States that this is a dictator. He can do anything he wants. No, he's not. He is the most prominent member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo in China. He's the head of a collective leadership. There are constraints on him as to what he can do. China has politics too.
I guess, Mr. Freeman, wouldn't people say that, he's not elected by the people, and the people don't have the ability to elect the members of the Politburo, and that his decision to pull back on those zero COVID regulations may not have been courage, but rather a concession to reality that, he didn't want to face further unrest and further conflict, and so he just did, what he had to do. So I bet, what do you think about that? Because there are some very harsh criticisms, and not to mention, of course, what he's doing to Uyghur Muslims. What do you say to those who are worried that he might actually be unstable, to do some of the things he's done, like the crackdown in Hong Kong, like what's happening to Uyghurs? Or do you think that, he's more of a, even if he's doing horrible things, still a rational actor?
Oh, I think he's a very rational actor. I think the program of re-education in Xinjiang, which began after a series of really quite awful terrorist attacks on the Han Chinese element in Xinjiang, was a great mistake. And I've actually argued with people in Beijing about that. I think one thing that the three Abrahamic religions do very effectively is resist oppression. And I think it is the wrong approach to try to oppress the religious sentiments of Uyghurs, whatever other factors may have caused terrorism. It was not Islam that did that. It was Uyghur nationalism, which has gotten bound up with religion, in part because the Chinese have suppressed religious practice in Xinjiang. I've visited Xinjiang many times, talked to graduates of the Islamic University there. They do train people to be learned in the Quran, and this has somehow gone off track. And I'm encouraged when I hear the Chinese say that, well, this is coming to an end, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Absolutely. We see those families reunited, the people who are missing accounted for. Hopefully that'll be a sign that it is coming to an end, God willing. Ms. Freeman, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your perspective on these very important issues. I suspect these conflicts will continue to arise, and we'll therefore have to have you back to discuss future developments, but hopefully it will be nothing that is harming anyone here or around the world. Thank you, Ms. Freeman, for your time.
I'll hope for the best and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, God willing. And we will send it back to you, Samana.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.